because you're not confident enough, you're not bold enough to tell it like it is on this one, even you, Nick. It's not Western society. It's not Western social values. It's Christian. Western society, it's a geographical location. What we call Western society is really Christian society. And again, the development, the evolution of Christian society, okay, has not been linear. It's not been straightforward. It's had its bumps along the way. I'm not hiding any of that stuff. But that's, we're all human beings and we're all flawed. And you're going to have good people and you're going to have bad people. And you're going to have people taking advantage and misusing and misrepresenting. And Christians are just like everybody else. But it's a Christian society. And it's a Christian ethical framework. And Christian ethics is very different from other ethics that are out there. And that is the kind of thing that is the foundation of our society. Now, fine, you want to call it Judeo-Christian? Good, no problem. I have no problem with that. But I'm going to continue to point out that the Christian part of Judeo-Christian is far more powerful and far more historically entrenched in what we would call Western society these days. But let's stop calling it Western society. Let's call it what it is. We're losing the Christian character of this country, and it's partly because there's apathy out there, but it's just as much largely because we're not fighting for it. I just don't think we're fighting very effectively for it.
On that score, the way that you laid it out, I agree with you. But the only reason I used Western in my description was because if you look around the world, you've got the Islamic world, you've got you've got these 2 or 3 major religions that are struggling, and even the word religion is too strong. Worldviews is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
One of them is Christian. You have another one that is Islamic. You've got the communist, atheistic side of things. So you've got 3 different houses you could live in. Okay, now we have historically picked the Christian one, and the Christian at one time, the Christian worldview was dominant across the globe. Look at the British Empire. Okay, there was no place that's saying, and it's still true today, by the way, that the sun does not set on the British Empire. They still have a tiny little island somewhere in the Pacific that's part of the British Commonwealth that, as the sun sets there, it comes up on another part of the British Empire. Little trivial, who cares kind of comment. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you have these 3 competing worldviews, that's what I was driving at. I'm not trying to say that, I feel embarrassed or I don't think I'm speaking out strongly enough. Because you know me as well as anybody else does. I am not afraid of a good argument and a good debate. I love it. It's part of what makes me good at what I do. But at the same time, I also recognize that there are other forces in the world that are competing with us for, dare I say it, domination. And if I had to pick one of those 3 houses to live in, guess which one I'm going to pick? It's not going to be the other 2.
Now, it's funny, Dinesh D'Souza, for those of you who have never heard of him or have not heard him or read his work, I recommend that you do. Dinesh D'Souza wrote a number of years ago a small book, and it's called, Letters to, I can't remember now, Conservative Letters to a Friend or something along those lines. I should have looked it up before I made a comment, but it's small explanations about why he's a conservative, and they're written to in response to questions by friends of his, and he's responding in these letters. So, and he talks about his background as a Christian growing up in India, and his experiences as a university professor when he talks about being a Christian growing up in India, and and how his students, could in this day and age, they don't like the idea of colonization. Although I'm not sure how successful the British were at colonizing in the true sense of the term India, but it's quite enlightening. And basically what he says is, the British influence in India, and particularly the Christian British influence in India, was profoundly beneficial to the Indian people. Profoundly so. Before the British showed up, they were burning wives at the same time they were burning wives alive of deceased husbands. Okay. Is that the correct thing to do, or are we going to say, well, that's, are we going to take the cultural sort of relativistic position that, well, they should do what they want to do and we should do what we want to do. We don't have the right to impose our views on them. Okay, I'm not insensitive to that argument. I'm not insensitive to the complexity of it. But I'm never prepared to concede that the point of whether or not Christian influence in India was a good thing for the people in India. Okay, and as for the British, there was one very telling point that Dinesh D'Souza makes in his writing, and he points out that it was the very idea of Christian ethics and British respect for law and order. And again, not perfect, but he makes the point that, if Hitler had been in charge in India instead of the British, and Gandhi's followers were lying down in front of trains to stop them, to disrupt public transportation in their campaign for independence, who in their right mind believes that those trains would have stopped if Hitler had been in charge?
Point. I was going to say the same thing.
So it's complicated, but look, I'm just a very strong believer in telling it like it is, Nick. I'm sorry if people are offended by it, because it certainly is not my intention to offend people. But as our friend Ben Shapiro likes to point out, facts don't have feelings, and those are just facts.
Yeah, he's absolutely right on that, and it's how do you argue with that?
We should get Ben to come back up here again. He's a good guy.
I really enjoyed that. That'd be a lot of fun to bring him back up, and because first of all, I was surprised how short he is physically. He's not exactly what you call a great big guy. He's about you and he are about as far apart. Because you're not a small guy, he's not a big one.
No, as I tell people, I'm a big guy, and I'm not just talking about my girth.
Yeah. Well, in that Ben is a big guy in a lot of ways, but physically isn't one of them.
Right.
But it would be fun to have him back. But I think just to kind of loop this all back to the whole point of this segment was JT making things worse out west.
Right.
Even if there isn't a separatist movement, there is the Wild Rose Party, who is dedicated to removing Alberta specifically from the Canadian family.
Right.
How successful they'll be, I don't know. I don't know how many votes they got in the last election. What votes they did get were probably protest votes. I get all that, but they came from somewhere. If the federal party, the federal leadership of this country had taken Alberta more seriously, they might still be there, but no one would even know who they are.
All right. And with that, Nick, we come close here to the end of the show. We've run a little bit over time. We usually end at 10 o'clock, but we started a couple of minutes late, had a couple of technical difficulties to start with. So we've allowed ourselves to run overtime because we did not want to deprive our listeners out there of the full 2-hour experience of the Nick and Joe Show. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining in to the live show. And again, if you're listening to the podcast, thank you very much for tuning in as well. Don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and neighbors. And, guys, if you listen to the show tonight live and you want to go back and listen to it again on the podcast, you're welcome to do that, because there's always stuff that you can learn from Nick and me. And, of course, there's always stuff that we can learn from you. Anyway, that's it for me, Nick.
All right. With that said, Joseph, I'll wish all of our listeners a good night, and we'll see you all again next week. In the meantime, ubiqueritas et amor, Deus sibi est. Good evening, God bless, don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have a fair wind in a following sea.